My name's Lucas. I'm 27, and if I'm being honest, family reunions have always been a mix of dread and duty for me. On one hand, they were supposed to be about togetherness, catching up with cousins, eating too much food, and reliving old stories. On the other, they had a darker side, one that revolved around the kind of relatives who kept score on everything. Every degree, every job, every car in the driveway was silently measured, weighed, and compared. My extended family had a way of turning even the most casual backyard barbecue into a competition where someone always had to be less than. I usually played the role of the quiet one, keeping my head down, answering questions politely, and escaping early when I could. But this year's reunion would turn out different. This year, the mask slipped, and the cruel truth of how they saw me came spilling out. When I pulled into the park where the reunion was being held, I actually felt a little hopeful. I'd been working hard lately. Nothing flashy, but I had a steady job. I'd finally paid off some debts that had weighed me down for years, and I was even thinking about moving into a better place soon. Small wins, but they mattered to me. I walked across the grass carrying a bowl of pasta salad, trying to put a smile on my face before stepping into the sea of familiar voices. The air smelled like grilled burgers and sunscreen. Kids were running around with water balloons, and the sound of my uncle's booming laugh carried over the picnic tables. For a second, it almost felt normal. But then came the moment, the one that stuck. As I approached the cluster of folding chairs under the pavilion, my Aunt Denise spotted me first. She had always been sharp-tongued, the kind of person who thought her opinions were just being honest, when in reality, they cut like blades. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer, and said loud enough for everyone around her to hear, "Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woodwork. We didn't think you'd show your face here after all your failures." The laughter that followed wasn't just hers. My cousins chuckled awkwardly, my uncle let out a low whistle, and even a couple of people I barely recognized from the extended family tree smiled nervously, as if laughing along was safer than being the target. I felt the smile on my own face freeze, my grip on the salad bowl tightening until I thought it might shatter. It wasn't just the words, it was the timing, the public spectacle, the way she made my presence into a joke. For a split second, I wanted to vanish. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the old shame creeping in, the one that had shadowed me for years when things hadn't gone right. But then something shifted. Instead of shrinking, a different thought planted itself firmly in my mind. I wasn't going to let this pass. Not this time. Not anymore. I set the bowl down on the nearest table and forced myself to keep my face neutral. Inside, though, it was like a storm was gathering. Denise's smile stayed on me a second longer, almost like she was checking to see if her jab had landed. She wanted me to flinch, to lower my head, to confirm the story she had built about me, the one where I was always behind, always the black sheep, always a convenient punchline. But I didn't. I just pulled out a chair, sat down quietly, and started to engage in small talk with one of my cousins as though nothing had happened. I could feel Denise's eyes still on me, waiting for the reaction she craved, and when she didn't get it, she clicked her tongue and turned back to her circle. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. That little exchange was just the opening shot in a long afternoon of subtle digs, pointed comparisons, and innocent remarks that all circled back to the same theme. Me, the one who hadn't measured up. Every time someone asked about work, Denise made a show of sighing and saying, "Well, not everyone can be successful, I suppose." When my cousin Eric mentioned he was buying a new car, she glanced at me and asked, "Still driving that old thing, Lucas?" Even when the topic had nothing to do with me, she found a way to turn it into a reminder of where she thought I stood. And all the while, that laugh of hers, sharp, dismissive, carrying just enough weight to make others join in, rang in my ears. I can't lie, it hurt. It always had. For years, I had let people like her dictate how I saw myself. Every time I stumbled, their voices seemed to echo louder in my head than my own. But sitting there that day, feeling the sting of her words and the burn of embarrassment, I also felt something else. A kind of clarity. If Denise wanted me to be the joke of the family, fine. But I had my own plans, ones she didn't know about yet. And the smile she flashed when she thought she had me cornered? That was the first one I decided I was going to erase. And that's where it really began. Because as much as Denise loved the spotlight, She had no idea that the show she was putting on was laying the perfect groundwork for what was coming next. As the afternoon stretched on, the weight of Denise's words lingered in the air like humidity that wouldn't break. It didn't matter how many polite conversations I tried to steer myself into. Somehow the current always looped back around to me, dragging me into the spotlight I never asked for. And every time, Denise was the one nudging it forward, her voice slicing through like a conductor's baton, making sure everyone remembered the role I was supposed to play in the family narrative. It started small, just comments slipped in between bites of potato salad. When my cousin Eric mentioned his new promotion, Denise clapped her hands and said, "Now that's what I like to see. Someone moving up in the world. Not everyone can say that." Her eyes flicked toward me as casually as someone brushing lint off their shirt, but the message hit like a brick. A few people chuckled, and I noticed the way heads tilted ever so slightly in my direction, waiting to see if I'd take the bait. I didn't. Instead, I took a long sip of lemonade and forced myself to smile. My silence was starting to irritate her. I could see it in the way her nose twitched when her barbs didn't land quite right. But Denise didn't stop there. At one point, while the kids were running wild with water balloons and a few adults started setting up a volleyball net, my aunt decided it was the perfect time to launch into one of her favorite games, family comparisons. She always treated them like harmless fun, but everyone knew better. "Let's see," she said loudly, clapping her hands to gather attention. "We've got Eric, who's doing so well at his new job. Did you hear they're considering him for a management role already? Then there's Rebecca, top of her class at university, practically guaranteed a scholarship for grad school. And of course little Thomas, already winning medals in track and field. Oh, we have such talented people in this family." She paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air before turning her gaze on me. "And then, well, Lucas is here too." The group erupted into laughter, not malicious from everyone, but uneasy, forced laughter, the kind people do when they don't know whether to push back or join in. Denise, of course, laughed the loudest, as though she'd just told the best joke of the day. My chest tightened, and I had to clench my jaw to stop myself from snapping. I wanted to remind her that I wasn't unemployed, that I had been climbing my own quiet path, that my life wasn't hers to measure out in teaspoons of disappointment. But I held my tongue, not because I didn't have the words, but because something inside me told me to wait. She was digging her own grave, and I was going to make sure she buried herself in it. By dinner time, things had gotten worse. My uncle grilled burgers and hot dogs, and we all lined up buffet style. When I finally got to the front, Denise swooped in behind me, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Oh, don't take too much, Lucas. You know, until you get your life figured out, maybe it's best to leave the big plates to the ones earning them." I froze with the tongs in my hand, the metal clinking against the pan as everyone within earshot turned to look. A couple of teenagers snickered, and one of my cousins muttered, "That's cold," under his breath. Denise just smiled sweetly, as if she'd said something caring rather than cruel. My appetite vanished, and I set my plate down half full, the food tasting like sawdust when I tried to force it down later. But the final straw that day wasn't about me directly. It was about my parents. My mom and dad had always been supportive, even if they didn't flaunt it. They were quieter, more reserved than the rest of the family, and because of that, Denise often treated them like afterthoughts. As we were all sitting around finishing dinner, she leaned back in her chair, patted her stomach, and said, "Well, at least most of us have raised successful children. Some people, I guess, just didn't know how to instill ambition." The air went still. My mom lowered her fork slowly, her lips tightening, and my dad's shoulders stiffened. They didn't say a word, but I saw the hurt flash across their faces. It wasn't just about me anymore. She was insulting them too, undermining the effort and love they had poured into raising me. My hands curled into fists in my lap, nails biting into my palms. Every fiber of me wanted to lash out, to make her choke on her smugness, but I stayed quiet, staring at the fading sunlight beyond the pavilion. Because something had shifted again. Denise thought she had won. She thought she'd turn me into the running joke of the reunion, another story for her to retell later with a satisfied smirk. But what she didn't realize was that every cruel word, every backhanded jab, every laugh at my expense was etching itself into my memory. Not as shame, but as fuel. She was giving me all the kindling I needed. And while everyone else might have thought it was just another year of Denise being Denise, I knew better. I was already planning, quietly, carefully. And when the time came, it wouldn't just be a comeback. It would be something she never saw coming. And then the microphone crackled. My uncle had set up a small PA system for the family announcements they did every year, where people would share milestones, engagements, graduations, promotions. Denise's eyes lit up as she strutted toward it, grabbing the mic like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. She glanced around, scanning the crowd, and I swear her eyes locked on me for half a second before she smiled wider. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing out. "This year has been incredible for so many of us. Eric's promotion, Rebecca's scholarship, Thomas's athletic success. Oh, I could go on. Truly, our family is full of achievers. And of course, we're all so grateful for the support of each other. Well, most of us, anyway." She let that hang, the corners of her mouth twitching as murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt something in me snap. And that was the moment I realized Denise had just handed me the perfect stage. The microphone in Denise's hand was like a weapon, and she knew exactly how to wield it. Her voice, sharp and confident, carried across the park as if the entire reunion were her personal stage. I sat frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, trying to predict where she would take it next. The jabs earlier in the day had been cruel enough, but what she did next would carve a line in the sand, one that I could never step back from. She tapped the microphone twice, like she wanted to make sure every single person was paying attention, and said, "You know, it's funny how families work. Some of us thrive, build real lives, real success. And some of us," she paused, eyes sweeping the pavilion until they landed squarely on me. "Well, some of us just can't seem to get it together, no matter how much help they've been given." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. That silence, that compliance, it gave her courage. She smiled thinly and went on, her words cutting deeper with every syllable. "Now, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I think we should be honest about where we stand. Lucas, dear, why don't you come up here and tell everyone what exactly you've been doing with yourself lately? We'd all love to know what keeps you so busy." For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. Surely she wouldn't put me on the spot like that, not in front of 50 people, not after the way she'd already cornered me throughout the day. But no, she was dead serious. I could see the gleam in her eyes, the anticipation of watching me squirm, stutter, and fail under the weight of everyone's gaze. I stayed seated, gripping the edge of the picnic bench so hard my knuckles turned white. My mom whispered my name softly, almost as if she were trying to protect me with nothing but her voice. But Denise wasn't finished. She leaned closer to the mic, her voice dropping into that faux sympathetic tone she used when she wanted to twist the knife. "Or maybe I should help him out," she said, "since he's too shy to admit it. You see, while Eric's been climbing the ladder at work and Rebecca's preparing for grad school, our dear Lucas has been, well, let's just say between opportunities. Still working odd jobs, still trying to figure out where he fits in this world. Isn't that right?" A low ripple of laughter spread through the group, nervous but undeniable. I felt my chest tighten, heat rushing up my neck. She wasn't just mocking me now. She was exposing me, stripping away every ounce of dignity I had left in front of the entire family. But then she went further. Too far. She turned her head slightly, as though confiding in the crowd, and added, "You know, it's such a shame. His parents sacrificed so much for him. College tuition, rent, even paying off that little mess with his credit card debt a few years ago. And this is the thanks they get. I suppose some people just can't carry the weight of responsibility." The words hit like a physical blow. My jaw dropped, and I heard my mom gasp beside me. That was supposed to be private, something no one outside of my immediate family even knew about. My parents had helped me when I was drowning, and I had worked tirelessly since then to repay them, to rebuild my life, brick by brick. And now Denise had taken that moment of vulnerability, that chapter of my past, and weaponized it in front of every single person I shared blood with. My dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor, but before he could speak, Denise's voice cut through again. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she said, still smiling. "We're family. Families are supposed to be open, right? Besides, maybe a little tough love will finally light a fire under him." The crowd was dead silent now, No more nervous laughter. A few cousins looked at me with wide eyes. Others looked down at their plates. I could feel the pity radiating off of them, and somehow that felt worse than the laughter had. My parents' faces were stricken, and I knew they were blaming themselves for not stepping in sooner, not shielding me from her venom. But inside me, something hardened. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal, so sharp, so undeniable, that it cleaved straight through the shame and left only resolve. She had taken my past struggles, twisted them, and broadcast them like a trophy for her own ego. She wanted to define me by my lowest points, to etch that image permanently into the minds of everyone present. But what she didn't understand was that betrayal has a funny way of waking you up, of reminding you exactly who someone is, and exactly why they can never be trusted again. I sat there, staring at Denise as she handed the microphone back to my uncle, her smirk wide and satisfied like she had just won some invisible war. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And I was going to make sure she remembered this day, not as the one where she broke me, but as the one where she set in motion the downfall she never saw coming. And just as I thought the humiliation was over, Denise leaned across the table as she passed me on her way back to her seat and whispered, "You'll thank me one day." I didn't move. I didn't blink. But inside, a plan was already forming, one careful piece at a time. The rest of the reunion passed in a blur I could barely process. Conversations hummed around me. Laughter floated through the air, but I felt like I was sealed inside a glass box, cut off from everything. Every sound was muffled, every face slightly distorted. Denise's words replayed in my head on an endless loop, her voice booming into the microphone, her little aside about my parents, her smug whisper as she walked past me. The more I thought about it, the heavier it pressed down, until even lifting my fork to eat felt like a chore. People avoided my gaze after that. A few cousins gave me sympathetic smiles, but most looked away quickly, not wanting to get dragged into the awkwardness. I caught snippets of whispers. "Did you know about that?" I had no idea. Poor guy. It was worse than open mockery. Pity was something I couldn't stomach. It stripped me down, made me feel like a child again, fragile and incapable. I excused myself before dessert and wandered off toward the edge of the park. The sun had started dipping behind the trees, painting everything in amber light, but I didn't notice the beauty of it. I sat on a bench under the oak trees and stared at the ground, trying to breathe past the knot in my throat. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the betrayal. Denise had torn open something private, something raw, and paraded it around like a badge of honor. She had dragged my parents into it too, shaming them in front of everyone when they had done nothing but love me through my worst moments. I thought about my mom's face when Denise revealed the debt she'd helped me through, how her lips had parted in shock, how her eyes had darted toward me in silent apology. I thought about my dad's chair scraping back as he'd tried to intervene, only to be drowned out by Denise's smug voice. They didn't deserve that. None of us did. The weight of it all came crashing down at once. My chest ached, my stomach churned, and I felt hollow. A failure. Exactly what Denise had painted me as. I thought about all the times I had tried to claw my way forward. Late nights juggling 2 jobs, weekends spent studying certifications, sacrifices nobody in that pavilion knew about. None of it seemed to matter now. Denise's words had drowned out years of effort in less than 5 minutes. I stayed out there for a long time, long enough that the smell of apple pie and ice cream drifted faintly on the wind, long enough to hear the squeals of kids as they packed up their water balloons for the day. Nobody came looking for me. Maybe they didn't notice I was gone. Or maybe they did and thought I needed space. Either way, I was alone. When I finally worked up the courage to walk back toward the pavilion, most of the family had begun packing up. Coolers were being lugged to cars, folding chairs stacked, leftover trays covered with foil. Denise was near the center, laughing as she helped wrap up food, acting as though nothing had happened. That, somehow, cut deeper than her cruelty. The ease with which she moved on, like she hadn't just dismantled me in front of everyone. I kept my head down as I helped my parents load our dishes into the trunk. They didn't say much, but I could feel the heaviness hanging between us. My mom finally reached out and squeezed my shoulder, her touch light but steady. "Don't let her words define you," she whispered. I nodded, but I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. The car ride home was silent. Streetlights flicked on one by one as we drove, casting fleeting shadows across the dashboard. I stared out the window, replaying every moment, every laugh, every sympathetic glance. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I felt like a shell of myself. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat in the dark, letting the weight settle. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how Denise had framed me, how she had branded me in the eyes of everyone present. I imagined the stories she'd tell afterward, the way she'd twist the knife even deeper when she recounted poor Lucas at future gatherings. For a while, the despair felt endless, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. But somewhere in the stillness of those hours, my mind began to shift. It was subtle at first, just the faintest spark of defiance. The thought that maybe this didn't have to be the end of the story. Maybe Denise's attempt to humiliate me could be the very thing that set something else in motion. By dawn, as the first light crept through my curtains, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. She had crossed too many lines, dragged my parents through the mud, and branded me as a failure for sport. If I stayed quiet, if I accepted it, she'd only grow bolder. She'd make it her tradition to break me down at every reunion. So I made a decision. I would suffer quietly for now, play the role she thought I'd been boxed into. But beneath the surface, I'd start planning. Carefully, patiently. Because the one thing Denise never considered was that the person she thought was the weakest in the room might also be the one most willing to wait for the perfect moment. And as I sat there in the silence of my room, staring at the faint glow of morning, I realized something that made me sit up straighter. Denise hadn't just humiliated me. She had given me exactly the weapon I needed, her own arrogance, her need to control the narrative. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I promised myself, the next time the family gathered, the smile on her face would be the first one to vanish. In the weeks after the reunion, I carried Denise's words with me like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, unshakable, but also strangely grounding. Every time I started to feel the old doubt creep in, I'd hear her sneer echo in my head. Still working odd jobs, still trying to figure it out. It hurt, but it also lit a fire under me. For years, I'd been slowly, quietly putting one foot in front of the other. But now it felt like I had something bigger to prove, not just to her, but to myself. The first step was small. I'd been studying for a professional certification for months, but had always found an excuse to delay the exam. Not ready yet, I'd tell myself. Too busy this week. But the morning after the reunion, I sat at my desk, logged in, and registered for the earliest available test date. No more hiding, no more waiting. I studied harder than ever, late nights with coffee and textbooks, flashcards scattered across my desk like fallen leaves. By the time the exam day came, I wasn't just ready, I was determined. And when the results came back showing I had passed with one of the highest scores in my testing center, I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't just relief. It was power. That certification unlocked a door. Within 2 months, I'd landed interviews at companies I'd only dreamed about before. I walked into those rooms with a quiet confidence, no longer weighed down by the narrative Denise had tried to saddle me with. When I finally got the job offer, a solid salary, benefits, and room to grow, I sat in my car outside the office and let out a laugh I hadn't heard from myself in years. My parents were the first people I told. My mom cried, hugging me so tightly I could feel her pride in every heartbeat. My dad, normally reserved, clapped me on the back with a grin that lingered all night. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like their son, I felt like someone they could brag about. With the new job came new stability. I moved into a nicer apartment, one with sunlight that poured through the windows in the morning and space enough for me to finally breathe. I traded in my old car for something reliable and sleek, not extravagant, but enough to make me smile every time I turned the key. Week by week, the life Denise had mocked me for lacking began to take shape. But it wasn't just about money or material things. It was about the way I carried myself. I noticed it when I walked into a meeting at work and people actually listened when I spoke. I noticed it when I reconnected with an old friend, and they said, "You seem different, more sure of yourself." And I noticed it most when I thought about the next reunion. Instead of dread, I felt anticipation. Not for the confrontation itself, but for the chance to show up as someone Denise couldn't dismiss so easily. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't broadcast my achievements on social media, didn't call up cousins to brag. I wanted Denise to believe she still had me pegged. I wanted her to walk into that next gathering smug and unprepared. Because the sweetest revenge isn't loud, it's patient. The months rolled by, and with each one, my confidence grew. I earned praise from my manager, even got tapped to lead a small team on a new project. The kind of responsibility that came with trust, the kind Denise always said I lacked. At night, I'd sometimes catch myself imagining the look on her face when she realized the failure she mocked had climbed further than she ever thought possible. But I didn't just focus on work. I started taking care of myself in other ways too. I hit the gym regularly, not obsessively, but enough to feel stronger and healthier. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, like playing guitar and sketching, and found joy in the things that made me feel whole again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. And then, one evening, I got a call that set the next phase in motion. It was my uncle, the same one who'd handed Denise the microphone at the reunion. He invited me to the next family gathering, a smaller one this time, at his house. "It won't be as big as the reunion," he said, "but you should come. It'll be good to see you." For a moment, my stomach clenched, remembering the humiliation of the last time. But then I looked around my apartment. The framed certificate on the wall, the work laptop on my desk, the steady paycheck stubs stacked neatly in a drawer, and I realized I wasn't the same person who had walked into that pavilion months ago. This time, I had something Denise couldn't strip away. And as I hung up the phone, I felt it. The tide was turning. Slowly, steadily, I was rising. And Denise? She had no idea the ground beneath her was already beginning to shift. The invitation to my uncle's smaller gathering sat on my kitchen counter for days, like a test I wasn't sure I was ready to take. Every time I walked past it, I felt the echo of that reunion. Denise's sneer, her voice booming into the mic, the pitying glances from relatives. But alongside that memory was something new, a steadiness in my chest that hadn't been there before. I wasn't the same Lucas she thought she'd humiliated into silence. I had changed, and now, I was starting to realize I had more leverage than I ever imagined. The night before the gathering, I stayed up late finishing a report for work. My team's project, one I'd been asked to lead just months into the job, was going to be presented to the executives the following week. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, and for the first time, it struck me. I was in a position now where people listened to me, respected me, trusted me with responsibility. I wasn't between opportunities anymore. I had climbed higher than Denise would ever believe. And then something happened that would turn my quiet rise into the perfect setup for revenge. It started innocently enough, a conversation with my cousin Rebecca. She called me a few days before the gathering, catching up like we hadn't since the reunion. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "I should have said something when Aunt Denise went after you. It wasn't fair." I told her not to worry about it, that I understood why no one wanted to jump into the fire. But then she hesitated and lowered her voice. "Lucas, I don't know if you know this, but Aunt Denise has been talking about you. A lot. Not just at the reunion. She's been spinning stories, saying you're still unemployed, still mooching off your parents, that you're a burden." The words made my jaw tighten, but I kept listening. Rebecca went on. "She even told some people you borrowed money from her once and never paid it back. That stopped me cold." "What? That's not true." "I know," Rebecca said quickly, "but she's been repeating it like it is. She loves making herself look like the martyr, you know? Like she's the one holding the family together while everyone else falls short." I sat there in silence, anger simmering low and steady. Not only had Denise humiliated me in public, she'd continued to smear me behind my back, fabricating stories to reinforce the narrative she wanted everyone to believe. That wasn't just petty, it was calculated. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. If she wanted to play with lies, fine. I had something she didn't, the truth. And the truth, paired with the position I was in now, could become a blade sharp enough to cut through every facade she had built. The next week at work, that thought stayed with me. I was surrounded by people who valued facts, numbers, results, proof. And proof was exactly what I could gather. I dug into old bank records, emails, documents, anything that painted the real story of the years she loved to weaponize against me. Not only did I have clear evidence that I'd never borrowed a dime from Denise, But I also had records of the money I'd repaid my parents, every installment carefully logged. My past wasn't perfect, but it wasn't hers to distort, and I suddenly realized just how powerful it would be to hold up the receipts, literally, when the time was right. But the setup didn't stop there. At the office, my manager pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "You've got a knack for this, Lucas. You should consider applying for the open supervisor position. You're already doing the work." My heart thudded. A promotion already? I hadn't expected it so soon, but the possibility planted itself firmly in my mind. If it happened, it would give me even more stability, more presence, more undeniable proof that I wasn't who Denise said I was. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I started talking more often. She wasn't just sympathetic. She was angry at how Denise treated me. "She's always been like this," Rebecca admitted one evening. "She builds herself up by tearing others down. But the family only lets her because no one wants to cross her." That sentence echoed in my head. No one wanted to cross her. That was the secret to Denise's power, fear. She had cultivated it for years, throwing her weight around, humiliating whoever she pleased, and everyone else chose silence to keep the peace. But peace bought at the price of truth was nothing but control. I realized then that I didn't just want to clear my name. I wanted to break that pattern. I wanted to show everyone that Denise wasn't untouchable, that her power was built on smoke and mirrors. The gathering at my uncle's was just days away, and as I stood in front of my bathroom mirror the morning of, adjusting the collar of my freshly pressed shirt, I felt something I hadn't before any family event. Anticipation. Not the anxious, stomach-churning kind, but the focused, deliberate kind. I was walking in with proof, with stability, with success that no amount of Denise's lies could erase. And for the first time, I wasn't going to let her dictate the story, because Denise had given me the perfect setup without even realizing it. Her arrogance, her lies, her hunger for control, it had all painted a target on her back. And I was the one holding the bow. The morning of my uncle's gathering, I woke up with that peculiar stillness that comes before a storm. Not the kind of storm that tears through with violence and chaos, but the kind that rolls in slow, deliberate, inevitable. I ironed my shirt, polished my shoes, and tucked a slim folder into my bag before leaving the apartment. Inside that folder were printouts of bank statements, repayment records, and work documents, receipts for every lie Denise had ever spun. I didn't know if I'd use them, but just knowing I had them gave me a sense of armor. When I arrived at my uncle's house, the atmosphere was smaller, more intimate than the reunion. No massive pavilion, no PA system, just cousins lounging on the deck, aunts and uncles milling around the kitchen, and kids racing through the backyard with sparklers, even though it was still daylight. I took a breath before stepping inside, reminding myself of one simple truth. I wasn't here as the family scapegoat anymore. I was here as someone in control. Of course, Denise spotted me almost immediately. She was by the kitchen island, wine glass in hand, holding court with a couple of relatives who were nodding along as she told some story. Her eyes flicked toward me, narrowed for a second, then curved into that familiar smile, the one that said she already thought she had the upper hand. "Well, look who decided to show up again," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the room. A few heads turned. I smiled calmly, stepping into the kitchen. "Good to see you too, Aunt Denise," I said evenly, my tone polite, measured. She wasn't expecting that. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "I was just telling everyone how resilient you are," she said, with that syrupy tone she used when her words carried hidden barbs. "Even when life keeps knocking you down, you still come around. Admirable, really." A ripple of laughter followed, though this time it was weaker, less sure. I noticed the hesitation, like some of them were beginning to question whether joining her chorus was worth it. That was my first sign the ground beneath her was shifting. I didn't take the bait. I simply set down the bottle of wine I'd brought as a gift and joined a group at the table. I could feel her watching me, waiting for the old Lucas, the one who would shrink, flush red, and let her words hang heavy in the air. But I didn't. I talked easily with my cousins, asked about their lives, even cracked a joke or two. For the first time, I felt the balance tilting. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. After dinner, my uncle suggested we all share updates, just like at the reunion, but without the microphone. "It's nice to hear what everyone's been up to," he said. People nodded, and the circle of conversation began. Rebecca talked about grad school. Eric mentioned his promotion again. Others chimed in with small milestones, new jobs, new houses, engagements. Then Denise leaned back in her chair and, as if on cue, said, "And what about Lucas? Surely he's got something to share. Or maybe not much has changed since last time." The air tightened. I could feel the room collectively brace itself, waiting for me to stammer or retreat. But instead, I smiled calmly and said, "Actually, quite a lot has changed." I spoke clearly, steadily, not bragging, not defensive, just factual. I told them about passing my certification exam, about my new job, about leading a team at work, and the upcoming project I'd be presenting to executives. I mentioned moving into my new apartment, about the stability I'd built piece by piece. The words weren't boastful. They were measured, confident, undeniable. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then my uncle clapped his hands. "That's fantastic, Lucas," he said warmly. Others chimed in with congratulations, genuine this time, not the polite nods of pity I'd gotten months before. My mom smiled, her eyes shining, and my dad gave me the kind of proud nod I'd waited years to see. But the best part was Denise's face. Her smile had frozen in place, brittle and strained, like a mask cracking at the edges. She hadn't expected this. She had built her entire narrative around the idea that I was stagnant, dependent, the family's perpetual disappointment. And here I was, calmly dismantling that story in front of everyone, replacing it with the truth. Still, she tried to claw it back. "Well, that's nice," she said with a forced laugh. "But I suppose we'll see how long it lasts this time. After all, some of us remember the debts, the setbacks." That was when I pulled the folder from my bag. I placed it on the table, sliding it toward her with a quiet precision that made every head turn. "Funny you mentioned that, Aunt Denise," I said softly, "because I've heard you've been telling people I borrowed money from you and never paid it back, and that I'm still living off my parents. Since you seem so interested in my finances, I thought I'd bring some clarity." I opened the folder and spread out the documents: bank records, repayment schedules, letters of clearance. Cold, hard proof that her stories were lies. "As you can see," I continued, keeping my voice calm, "I've repaid every cent my parents ever lent me. And as for you, well, since I've never borrowed money from you, there was nothing to repay in the first place." The silence that followed was electric. Denise's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Eyes darted from the papers to her, then back to me. Rebecca leaned forward, reading one of the statements, and then looked up with raised brows. "It's all right here," she said simply. The shift was immediate. For years, Denise had thrived on the family's silence, on their willingness to take her words at face value. But now, for the first time, she was caught, exposed, and the room knew it. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly. I just wanted to clear that up, since we're all about honesty in this family. And then I let the silence hang, giving her no escape, no clever retort to mask the truth. It was in that silence, in the way the family looked at her with new eyes, that I knew the revenge had landed. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with precision, with proof, with undeniable calm. And as Denise squirmed in her chair, cheeks burning, I felt something settle in me that had been absent for years. Control. The silence after I laid the papers on the table stretched longer than I ever could have imagined. No one rushed to fill it with nervous laughter this time. No one looked away to protect Denise from embarrassment. For once, all eyes were on her, not in admiration, not in compliance, but in cold, unflinching scrutiny. Denise shifted in her chair, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Her face flushed crimson, and for the first time in my life, I saw her at a loss for words. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then gave a brittle laugh that cracked halfway through. "Well, I was only joking," she stammered, waving a hand at the documents like they were trivial. "Families exaggerate. You know how it is." But no one laughed with her. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice sharp. "It wasn't a joke when you told me he owed you money. It wasn't a joke when you called him a burden." Eric spoke next, surprising me. "You've been doing this for years, Aunt Denise. Always tearing people down. Maybe it's time you stopped." The weight of their words crushed her attempt at recovery. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Even her husband sat stiffly beside her, staring down at his plate as though he wanted no part in the mess she'd made. For once, the performance was over. My uncle cleared his throat, his voice firm. "Denise, enough. We don't need this kind of poison in the family anymore." His tone carried finality, a kind of authority that silenced even the faintest murmur. Denise sputtered, rising to her feet. "Oh, so now I'm the villain? After everything I've done for this family?" Her voice cracked on the last word, desperation creeping in. She turned toward the door, muttering, "You're all ungrateful," before storming out of the room. The slam of the screen door echoed through the house like a gavel striking wood. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. My dad nodded, his jaw tight, but his expression proud. Slowly, conversations resumed, but the tone was different. Warmer, more genuine. People asked me about my job, about my apartment, about what I wanted to do next. Not out of pity, but out of curiosity, out of respect. For the first time, I wasn't the family's running joke. I was simply part of the circle, no longer diminished by Denise's shadow. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Rebecca hugged me tightly. "She'll never forgive you," she said softly, almost with a laugh. "But that's her problem now." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "She doesn't have to forgive me. She just has to live with the truth." When I stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars stretched wide above me, and for the first time since that awful reunion, I felt free. Denise's power had always been built on lies, on the family's silence. But the moment the truth came into the light, her kingdom crumbled. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I would carry with me forever. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't fire or fury. It's calm, undeniable proof, delivered at the perfect moment. The last image that stays with me isn't Denise storming out, red-faced and sputtering. It's the way the family looked at me after, the shift in their eyes, the recognition that I wasn't who she said I was. And that was enough. Because in the end, the smile I erased wasn't just hers. It was the smug grin she'd worn for years, the one built on my silence. And that night, for the first time, it was gone. I was 35 when I finally stopped trying to earn my family's approval. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or anything, just a quiet realization that no matter what I did, I'd always be the second best son. My name's Ryan, and I guess if you asked my parents, I'm the disappointment who moved too far, worked too much, and never calls. That's what Mom likes to say, usually followed by a half laugh that makes it sound like a joke. Except it's not. Growing up, everything revolved around my younger brother, Adam. He was the golden child from the moment he could form a sentence. He got straight A's after Mom helped him with every project, played varsity basketball after Dad paid for private coaching, and somehow earned a brand new car at 16. When I questioned it, Dad said, "Well, Ryan, not everyone's as independent as you. Translation, you're on your own." So I worked part-time jobs, paid for college myself, and built something from scratch. It wasn't glamorous at first, a small logistics startup that ran out of a shared office space. I spent years surviving on ramen and gas station coffee. Meanwhile, Adam bounced between hobbies, startups, and girlfriends, each one ending with a tearful phone call to Mom about how the world was against him. And every time, the family rallied behind him. By my late 20s, I'd quietly grown that struggling startup into a thriving company. I bought my first house, invested in a couple of rental properties, and even started managing some of my parents' assets, at their request, ironically. They never asked how I afforded anything. They just assumed I got lucky. I didn't correct them. Let them believe luck was my co-founder. Then, last month, Mom called with that familiar tone she uses when she wants something. "Sweetheart," she said, dragging out the word. "We're all meeting for dinner next Friday. At that new place downtown, the Lantern. Everyone's coming. You have to be there." Normally, I'd find an excuse. Work trip, late meeting, anything. But something in her voice made me pause. I hadn't seen the whole family in nearly a year, and maybe, stupidly, I thought things could be different. When I arrived, the table was already full. Mom, Dad, Adam, his fiancée, two of my aunts, an uncle, and even Grandma. There were half-finished glasses of wine, loud laughter, and the faint sound of music from the bar. The second I stepped in, conversation died down for a beat. just long enough for me to notice how everyone's smiles looked a little too forced. Ryan, you made it. Mom stood up, air kissing me like we were strangers at a charity gala. Of course, I said, setting down the bottle of wine I'd brought. Wouldn't miss it. Adam leaned back in his chair, smirking. Fancy seeing you here, big shot. Didn't think you remembered where we eat. Nice to see you too, I said evenly, taking a seat. Dinner started pleasantly enough, though the conversation was one-sided. They asked Adam about his new venture, a podcast about financial freedom for creatives. Mom called it visionary. Dad said, he's got that entrepreneurial spirit, just like his brother. The difference was, I'd actually done it. When the food arrived, Dad raised his glass. To family, he said, even if some of us forget where we came from. Everyone laughed. Everyone but me. I smiled politely, staring at my plate. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables. Perfectly arranged, but somehow cold. Halfway through the meal, Dad stood up again. His face was flushed, either from the wine or the attention he clearly enjoyed. All right, he said, waving a hand. Let's make this a night to remember. He looked around the table like he was about to announce a surprise engagement. Mom clasped her hands dramatically, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Your mother and I have been thinking. Dad began, his tone heavy with self-importance. We're not getting any younger, and we want to make sure everything's taken care of when we're gone. Adam straightened up, his grin widening. Grandma frowned slightly, as if she already knew what was coming. So, Dad continued, we've decided to leave everything. The house, the savings, the shares, to Adam. He's the only one who's ever made us proud. The room fell silent for half a second, then erupted. Mom clapped like a game show audience member. One in actually said, about time. Adam stood up and did a mock bow. I sat there, fork in hand, pulse steady. Not angry, not sad, just numb. Dad looked at me expectantly. You understand, right, son? You've got your own thing. You don't need our help. Right? I said softly. I don't. That seemed to satisfy him. He grinned and sat down. The conversation picked up again, laughter filling the air, everyone pretending it was just another family dinner. But inside, something shifted. I looked at each of them. Their smug faces, their fake smiles, their shallow congratulations, and realized just how small their world really was. They thought pride was measured in approval, success in inheritance. I didn't say another word. When the waiter came by, I excused myself to take a call, left cash for my portion, and walked out. The cool air outside hit me like a reset button. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the restaurant's glowing windows and hearing faint echoes of laughter from inside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like someone finally watching a movie he no longer wanted to be in. 2 days later, my phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls, texts, dozens of notifications from the family group chat. It started with, Dad, what is going on with the house title? Then Mom, Ryan, did you do something? The lawyer says everything's been transferred to you? And then Adam, in all caps, dude, tell me this is a joke. I opened the messages slowly, my reflection faintly visible on the phone screen. The same face they said never made them proud. I took a breath, leaned back in my chair, and watched as message after message came in, each more frantic than the last. Then, one by one, the group chat exploded. And that's when things really started to get interesting. When I was younger, I used to think that if I worked hard enough, I could earn my parents' respect. That maybe one day they'd look at me and see someone worth being proud of. But after that dinner, after watching them cheer as my father publicly disowned me in favor of my brother, I stopped believing that. And when their messages started flooding in, part of me felt a little satisfaction. Not because I wanted revenge, but because, for once, they were the ones confused, scrambling, and powerless. Still, I didn't respond. Not yet. By the next morning, I had 12 missed calls from Dad, 9 from Mom, and a string of texts from Adam. His tone started calm. Hey man, Dad's freaking out about something. Did you maybe file something by accident? Then more demanding. Okay, seriously, what's going on with the business account? I can't log in. By noon, he'd resorted to, you think this is funny? You're gonna regret messing with us. I ignored every message. Instead, I went about my day like normal, coffee, emails, meetings. It was strangely peaceful, watching them spiral while I sat in quiet control. For context, My parents had never been good with money. They came from modest backgrounds, and when Dad's small construction company started doing well in the early 2000s, he got reckless. Big house, luxury car, country club membership. He loved appearances. But by the time I finished college, the business was sinking under debt. I'd stepped in to help, set up a new structure, got the accounts in order, even put my own name on a few assets temporarily to help consolidate things legally. They signed off on everything back then because I was the numbers guy. They didn't read the fine print. Years passed. I paid off loans, refinanced the house, grew their business using my network, and even created a holding company to keep everything tidy. On paper, it made sense for me to be the managing partner. They never asked questions. As long as the lifestyle stayed intact, they were happy. And now? Well, that structure was still in place. Everything they thought was theirs had been legally under my umbrella for years. When Dad finally cornered me 2 days later, it wasn't calm. He showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant buzzed me. Ryan, there's an older gentleman here. Says he's your father. He's loud. I sighed. Send him in. The door burst open before I could stand. What is this? Dad barked, slamming a folder on my desk. Inside were printouts of property titles, company filings, and a recent account statement, all bearing my name. You've got some nerve, he continued. Your mother and I trusted you with this paperwork. And now you've, what? Stolen everything from us. I kept my voice steady. I didn't steal anything, Dad. Everything's been structured like this for years. You signed off on every document. That was for tax purposes, he yelled. Temporary. You were supposed to put it back. I leaned forward slightly. You never asked me to. His face turned red, a vein pulsing near his temple. You think this is funny? You think you can humiliate me in front of my own family? I didn't answer. Because honestly, he'd humiliated himself. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Undo it, Ryan. Now, or I swear I'll. You'll what? I said quietly. Call your lawyer? Go ahead. He'll confirm it's all legal. I've protected you from bankruptcy for years. Maybe you should thank me. His jaw clenched. He didn't like being reminded of that part. The fact that without my intervention, his empire would have collapsed a decade ago. Unbelievable, he muttered, storming out of my office. As the door slammed, I heard him snap at my assistant. You work for a snake. That night, Mom called. Her tone was softer, but no less manipulative. Ryan, honey, she started, using that sugary voice I'd grown up hating. You know your father's temper. He didn't mean all those things. He's just hurt. Hurt. I repeated. He stood up in a restaurant and announced I wasn't part of the family. Oh, he was joking, she said quickly. You know how he is. Don't take it so seriously. We were just celebrating Adam's new phase of life. By cutting me out of the will. There was a pause. Well, we just thought he needed it more. I exhaled through my nose, trying not to laugh. You mean, you thought I'd be fine without you? That I'd keep helping no matter what? Ryan, please don't twist things. We love you both. You love what I do for you, I said flatly. Not me. Her silence told me I'd hit the mark. Before hanging up, she tried one last guilt trip. You're breaking this family apart, Ryan. Is that what you want? No, I said calmly. I just want to stop pretending there was one to begin with. Over the next week, the tension grew. Adam began sending group messages, long, dramatic ones filled with blame. Bro, you've gone too far. Mom's been crying nonstop. Dad's talking about selling his car because you froze the accounts. Are you proud of yourself? I didn't respond to any of it. Meanwhile, relatives started picking sides. Aunt Lisa called me a heartless traitor in the group chat. Uncle Joe, who I barely spoke to, sent a private message. Good for you. They've been using you for years. Even Grandma called one afternoon, her voice trembling. Ryan, dear, I don't understand what's happening, but please don't let them turn you cruel. You've always been the kind one. That one stung, because she was the only person in that family who'd ever treated me fairly. At the same time, Mom and Dad kept up appearances publicly. They told friends and neighbors it was all a misunderstanding, while quietly begging me to reverse the legal transfers. They even sent an email titled Family Reconciliation Agreement, drafted by some cousin who'd taken a few business law courses. It basically said I'd return everything in good faith once Dad stabilized the accounts. I didn't even dignify it with a reply, but behind the scenes, things started unraveling for them fast. Their credit cards, tied to company funds, stopped working. The utilities at the big house came under my management, and late payments started bouncing back to me. I didn't cut them off entirely, not yet. I just let the paperwork stand. Let the truth sink in slowly. One night, I got a call from Adam. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I said. He didn't waste time. "You can't do this, man. You're ruining everything. Mom's losing it. I'm not doing anything. You guys did this to yourselves." He groaned. "You've always been so dramatic. Just give the house back. It's theirs." "It's not," I said simply. "It's under my name. Always has been." "You're unbelievable," he spat. "They gave you everything growing up, and this is how you repay them?" I actually laughed. "They gave me nothing, Adam. Remember the used bike I got for my 16th birthday while you got a car with a bow on it? Or when they paid your college tuition but told me to learn responsibility? You call that giving? Stop living in the past," he snapped. "They chose me because I care about this family. You just care about control." "Control?" I said quietly. "You mean boundaries." There was a long silence before he said, "You think you're so much better than everyone. Well, guess what? You're not." Then he hung up. I stared at the screen, half smiling. Because if there's one thing people like my brother can't stand, it's losing power. Over the next few days, Mom tried new tactics. She sent photos of the family, old ones, from when we were kids, captioned with things like, "Remember when we were happy?" Then she switched to emotional manipulation. "We might lose the house, Ryan. Your father's health isn't good. Is this what you want?" She even called my office pretending to be a client just to get me on the line. When I picked up and realized it was her, she whispered, "You're killing us, sweetheart." It was exhausting, the way they twisted everything into guilt. But it also reaffirmed something. They didn't want reconciliation, they wanted compliance. Then, about a week later, Dad sent one final message. "If you don't fix this by Monday, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of son you are." That was the moment I knew it was going to get ugly. Because he didn't realize, I was just getting started. Sunday night, I got an unexpected knock at my door. Not a text, not a call, an actual knock. The kind that makes you pause mid-step because something about it feels deliberate. I looked through the peephole and saw my parents standing there. Mom held a folder against her chest like a shield. Dad had that same scowl he used to wear when he'd catch me talking back as a teenager. I considered not opening the door, but part of me wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. I unlocked it slowly. "You could have called." Mom forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We thought it'd be better to talk face to face, honey." Dad brushed past her and stepped into the house without waiting for permission. "Enough games, Ryan. Sit down." It was surreal, standing in my own living room, being ordered around like a child again. I stayed standing. He dropped a stack of papers on my coffee table. "We talked to our lawyer. We know what you did." "What I did?" I asked, my tone calm. "You transferred everything under your name," he said, his voice rising. "You've been plotting this for years." I almost laughed at that. "Plotting? You mean managing the assets you begged me to stabilize?" Mom quickly jumped in, trying to play mediator. "Ryan, please. We know things got complicated, but we can fix this. Just sign the reversal paperwork. We'll make sure everyone knows it was all just a misunderstanding." "Everyone?" I repeated. "You mean your friends? The same ones you've been lying to about how well Adam's business is doing?" Her face tightened, but she didn't deny it. Dad stepped closer. "Enough. You're not smarter than me, son. You think some fancy lawyer is going to save you when you're stealing from your own parents?" "I'm not stealing," I said quietly. "I'm protecting what's mine. What I built. What you handed me to clean up after you nearly ruined it." His nostrils flared. "You ungrateful." Mom cut him off. "Harold." Then she turned back to me. "Ryan, listen to me. You've made your point, all right? You've embarrassed us. You've scared us. Congratulations. You win. Now please, just give it back." There it was again. Give it back. As if I'd taken something that was rightfully theirs. I shook my head slowly. "No." Dad's voice turned cold. "Then I hope you're ready for what comes next." They left soon after, but not before Dad muttered something about making me pay. I didn't take it seriously, at least not until the next morning. When I woke up, my phone was blowing up with notifications again, but this time, they weren't from family. They were from clients. Emails. Dozens of them. Subject lines like urgent, contract termination, and concerns about company reputation. My heart dropped. I opened one. It was from a longtime partner who'd worked with my firm for years. "Ryan, I received troubling information this morning about alleged financial misconduct tied to your name and your company. Until we get clarity, we're suspending all collaboration. I opened another. Same tone. Same vague accusation. By the fifth one, I realized what had happened. They'd gone public. My parents, my own flesh and blood, had started spreading rumors that I'd embezzled money from them. There were posts on Facebook, long paragraphs written by Mom about family betrayal, about how I'd stolen the roof over their heads. She framed it like some tragic story of parents being scammed by their greedy son who thinks he's better than everyone. Dad commented under it. He used our trust to take everything. Pray for us. Dozens of relatives and family friends flooded the comments with sympathy. I can't believe he'd do that to his parents. So heartbreaking. Money changes people. And the worst part? They tagged my business page. In less than 24 hours, the post had hundreds of shares. My inbox filled with messages, some supportive, most judgmental. That morning, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the screen, the weight of it all pressing down. I'd spent years building my reputation from nothing. Every late night, every negotiation, every client I'd earned through trust. And now, a few lies from the people who should have been in my corner were threatening to destroy it all. Around noon, Adam called. Bro, he started, fake sympathy dripping from his voice. I told them not to do it, man. But they're just so hurt. You really blindsided them. I stayed silent. He continued. Look, if you just give the stuff back, we can fix this. Delete the posts. Issue a public apology. Say it was a miscommunication. Miscommunication? I finally said. They accused me of theft. Yeah, well, they're emotional. You know how Mom gets. I could almost hear the smirk in his tone. He was enjoying this. Let me guess, I said. You helped them write it. He hesitated for half a second too long. I might have helped them phrase it better. But come on, man, you brought this on yourself. That was it. The last piece clicked into place. It wasn't just my parents. Adam was orchestrating it. The golden child who could do no wrong, the one they always bailed out, had found a new way to play the victim while turning me into the villain. I hung up without another word. That afternoon, my assistant, Maya, knocked gently on my office door. Ryan, there's something you should see. She held up her phone. There was a video, shaky, taken on someone's phone. My dad, standing in front of their house, giving a teary speech about losing everything because of his own son's greed. Mom stood beside him, dabbing fake tears. Adam filmed, occasionally chiming in. Tell them how he took your business, Dad. It was posted on social media with the caption, When family betrays you for money. I felt something inside me twist, not anger exactly, but something heavier. A deep, cold disbelief. For a moment, I thought about calling them, confronting them directly. But what would I even say? The people on that video weren't the same parents who raised me. They were performers now, acting out a tragedy they'd written to protect their own pride. The fallout was fast. Within 48 hours, 2 more clients froze their contracts. A journalist from a local paper emailed me asking for a statement. My company's PR inbox filled with requests for comment. Maya looked at me across the desk, concern written all over her face. What do we do? I leaned back, forcing myself to breathe. We don't do anything yet. She frowned. You're just going to let them drag you like this? Not forever, I said quietly. But I'm not playing defense. Not this time. That night, I got one more message from Mom. You could have avoided all this if you'd just done the right thing. We gave you life. You owe us. That line, you owe us, echoed in my head for hours. Because that was the truth behind everything. They didn't want fairness. They wanted obedience. They wanted to own me, just like they thought they owned everything else. I didn't reply. I didn't sleep, either. I stayed up reading through old documents, pulling up years of emails, contracts, and receipts. Every favor I'd done, every debt I'd covered, every legal signature they'd scribbled without bothering to read. And by morning, I realized something that made my pulse quicken. In their rush to smear my name, they'd made a mistake, a big one. The kind that could flip everything in my favor. Because while they'd been too busy posting their little sob story, they'd publicly admitted to details that proved they'd known about every single transfer all along. And that was my leverage. But I didn't move on it yet. Not immediately. Because part of revenge isn't just winning. It's letting the other side believe they're safe. And my family, my so-called family, had no idea that the storm they started was about to come back their way, stronger than they could imagine. The next week felt like slow-motion freefall. Every morning, I woke up to new chaos, more calls from clients, more articles quoting my parents' heartbreaking story, and more relatives sending me long-winded messages about forgiveness. I'd become the villain of a narrative I didn't even write. At first, I thought I could weather it. That truth would surface on its own. But the thing about rumors is that they spread faster than facts, especially when they come wrapped in tears and nostalgia. My parents knew exactly which strings to pull. The newspaper article was the breaking point. The headline read, "Local couple claims son stole family business in shocking betrayal." It included screenshots of public posts, cropped text messages taken out of context, and even a quote from Adam, calling me a man so obsessed with control that he forgot what love looks like. I remember sitting in my car outside the office, the paper folded on the passenger seat, rain streaking down the windshield. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, eyes hollow, shoulders heavy. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely defeated. Inside, the office was tense. People whispered when I walked past. Some avoided eye contact. Maya did her best to keep things afloat, but even she looked worried. At lunch, she came into my office quietly. "Ryan," she said, "I think you should see this." She turned her laptop around. It was a Reddit thread, thousands of comments under the same story my parents had told the press. Strangers debating whether I was a monster or just misunderstood. Someone even dug up an old photo of me at a charity event and captioned it, "He looks smug even here." I let out a small, humorless laugh. Amazing. They've turned it into a full-blown morality play. Maya hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want to issue a statement?" "No," I said. "Not yet." The truth was, I couldn't. Not without looking defensive. Not without confirming details that might backfire. The internet doesn't care about nuance. It cares about spectacle. And right now, my family was the ringmaster. Over the next few days, things got worse. My parents froze me out of family communication, creating a new group chat without me. Family only. As if I weren't blood. My cousins joined the parade of passive-aggressive posts, quotes about greed destroying families and how money reveals true character. The silence from my grandmother, however, hurt the most. She didn't post anything, didn't call, didn't write. Just silence. And somehow, that quiet disappointment from the one person I respected most cut deeper than all the lies combined. I didn't tell anyone, but there were nights I almost drove to their house. Not to yell, but just to ask why. To stand there, face to face, and ask how they could twist something so profoundly. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the look on my dad's face in that restaurant. That smug satisfaction when he announced I wasn't worthy of their pride. No, they made their choice. By Friday, I was mentally done. Physically too. I left work early, drove aimlessly until I ended up by the water. The city lights reflected off the waves, and for the first time in years, I felt small, like all my success, all my effort, meant nothing if the people who raised me could tear it down in a week. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at the water, until my phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. The message said, "Mr. Brooks, this is Jonathan from Holloway and Pierce. Your father just attempted to transfer ownership of the construction firm's vehicles and accounts. You're listed as the controlling shareholder. Would you like us to block the move?" For a second, I couldn't even process it. Then it clicked. They weren't just smearing me publicly. They were actively trying to take everything back. That's when something in me shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe clarity. But for the first time since the whole mess began, I felt calm. Because I realized what I was dealing with wasn't a family problem anymore. It was a business one. And business, at least, I understood. I told the lawyer to block all transfers immediately. Then I spent the entire night reviewing documents, verifying every account, every signature, every asset. The deeper I went, the more I realized how reckless they'd become. In their desperation, they'd crossed lines that couldn't be blurred away. Unauthorized withdrawals, fake invoices, and attempts to bypass shareholder rights. By dawn, I had enough evidence to bury them legally if I wanted to. But I wasn't going to rush. Revenge done right isn't loud. It's strategic. The following week, I started rebuilding, not just the business's reputation, but my own center of gravity. I stopped reading the comments. I shut down social media. I met with clients face to face, explained the situation calmly, and showed them proof. Some left anyway. Others stayed, quietly impressed by how composed I was. The losses stung, but oddly, I started feeling lighter. One afternoon, Maya came into my office again. "You look different," she said, setting down my coffee. "Different how?" "Like someone who's not scared anymore." I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally remembered who I am. It wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about regaining my focus. The same focus that got me here in the first place. So I threw myself into work. Late nights, new deals, expansions I'd postponed because I was too busy keeping my family's affairs in order. I stopped being their unpaid safety net and started being what I'd always been good at, a builder. Meanwhile, word started spreading that my parents' finances were collapsing. Without access to the business accounts, they couldn't sustain their lavish lifestyle. The big house, mortgage overdue, their country club membership, suspended. Adam's podcast studio, quietly shut down after 3 missed payments. They'd spent so long depending on me that they'd forgotten how to survive without me. But I didn't gloat. Not yet. Because deep down, I still hoped they'd wake up, that maybe losing control would make them reflect. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from Grandma. Short, simple, written in her careful, old-fashioned way. "Ryan, I need to see you. Don't tell your parents." I drove to her house that same evening. When she opened the door, she looked friendlier than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp, the same blue-gray that used to soften whenever she'd defend me as a kid. We sat in her small living room, the faint scent of lavender filling the air. "I know you didn't do what they're saying," she began softly. "Your father came here last week, ranting about betrayal. But I remember the papers you showed me years ago, how you fixed their mess after the recession." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "They won't listen." She nodded slowly. "They never do. They confuse pride with love. Always have." There was a pause. Then she reached for a small wooden box on the table and handed it to me. Inside were documents, handwritten notes, old receipts, even copies of agreements my father had signed. "I kept these," she said, "just in case they ever turned on you. I hoped it wouldn't come to that." I sat there in stunned silence. "Why would you keep them?" Her eyes glistened. "Because I knew one day you'd need proof that you were the honest one." Something cracked inside me then. Not anger, not bitterness, just relief. For the first time, someone believed me without needing an explanation. As I drove home that night, the box on the passenger seat, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: purpose. Because now I wasn't just surviving. I had leverage. I didn't plan to use it immediately. I wanted them to stew in their self-made chaos a little longer. But I started laying quiet groundwork, meeting with attorneys, restructuring ownership papers so no one could ever touch them again, transferring digital records into secure storage. Every step I took was silent, deliberate, methodical. And all the while, my family kept spiraling publicly, arguing in comment sections, contradicting themselves, revealing more than they realized. One night, I got another call from Adam. This time, his tone was shaky, less arrogant. "Mom and Dad are losing it, man," he said. "They're blaming each other. The bills are piling up. Can't you just, I don't know, fix this?" I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before saying, "I already did. You just didn't like how." He exhaled sharply. "You're really going to let your own parents fall apart?" "I didn't let them fall," I said quietly. "They jumped." For once, he didn't have a comeback. When the call ended, I sat back and looked around my office. It felt different now, not like a battlefield, but like a fortress. I'd hit rock bottom. They'd taken everything they could, my reputation, my peace, my name, and yet I was still standing. Stronger, sharper, colder maybe, but focused. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because my parents thought they'd humiliated me. But what they didn't realize was that humiliation, when endured quietly, becomes fuel. And I was done playing defense. The storm had passed, but the wreckage it left behind was exactly what I needed. My parents' campaign of lies had burned every bridge they once stood on. Their friends avoided them. The family gossip machine turned inward, and Adam, Mr. Financial Freedom Guru, was suddenly very quiet online. In their desperation to destroy me, they destroyed their own credibility. And I was patient enough to let them finish the job before I even lifted a finger. For weeks, I stayed quiet. Not a single public statement, no angry responses, no online brawls. Just silence. People mistook it for guilt, but really, it was strategy. Because while they ranted and cried for attention, I was working behind the scenes with my attorney, building something far more permanent than a rebuttal post. My grandmother's box of papers turned out to be a gold mine, literally and legally. Among the notes were signed letters acknowledging every temporary transfer of property and assets to my name. They even thanked me for personally guaranteeing family stability. That phrasing? My lawyer nearly smiled when he saw it. "This isn't just protection, Ryan," he said. "It's admission." He was right. My parents had unknowingly written their own confession years ago, but I wasn't looking to sue them. Not yet. I wanted something cleaner, something poetic. So I waited until their finances reached critical failure. The mortgage company had started foreclosure proceedings. Their credit cards were maxed out. Adam's lease on his apartment had expired, and he was crashing at their house, posting motivational quotes about tough times building strong people. The irony was almost too much. Then, one Friday morning, my lawyer called. "Ryan, just confirming. You still hold the master deed on the house, correct?" "Correct," I said, sipping my coffee. "And the grace period on their payments ended last week." "Also correct." He paused. "Then technically, you're within your rights to initiate repossession." I looked out my window, the city stretching beneath me in quiet rhythm. "Let's do it." He hesitated. "You sure? This will get messy." "It's already messy," I said. "Let's just make it official." Within 48 hours, legal notices were issued. My parents' home, the same one where Dad announced to a cheering table that I'd never made them proud, was now under my control again. Of course, they didn't read the fine print. They thought the notice was a scam until an actual property manager showed up. I didn't find out how they reacted until Adam called me, voice trembling with fury. "You can't be serious," he yelled. "They just got served. Are you actually kicking your parents out of their house?" "I'm enforcing ownership," I said evenly. "You're heartless, man. They're broke. They're scared. Then they should have thought of that before turning me into their villain." He laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you the good guy? Everyone's gonna hate you for this." I smiled faintly. "They already do. The difference now is, I don't care." He cursed under his breath and hung up. 2 days later, Mom called. Her voice cracked between anger and fear. "Ryan, please. Your father isn't well. This stress is killing him. Can't you just give us more time?" I leaned back, my tone calm. "You had years of time. You used it to humiliate me." "It was a misunderstanding," she cried. "You're twisting everything." "No," I said softly. "You are. And you've been doing it since the day I was born." She went quiet. For the first time, I think she realized the old emotional tricks didn't work anymore. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "Neither did I replied. "But you made your choice when you went to the media." The call ended in silence. By the following week, the eviction date was confirmed. But I wasn't cruel. I arranged temporary housing through one of the companies and used rental properties, fully furnished and prepaid for 6 months. I didn't do it for them. I did it for Grandma. She'd asked me, during one of our last talks, to leave room for grace. So I did. Barely. When they moved out, neighbors watched from their lawns as boxes and furniture were loaded into trucks. Mom sobbed for the cameras she'd once used to broadcast her victimhood. Dad avoided looking at me. And Adam, standing near the curb, muttered something under his breath that I didn't catch. Probably another excuse, another attempt to make me the villain in his story. I didn't speak to them, didn't gloat, just signed the final transfer forms and handed the manager the keys. That night, I walked through the empty house alone. The echo of my footsteps filled rooms that used to hold laughter, tension, and so many arguments I'd tried to forget. There were faint marks on the wall where family photos once hung, smiling faces that looked so different from the people they'd become. I stood in the dining room for a long time, staring at the spot where Dad had made his little announcement. It felt poetic in a way, standing there now, the legal owner of the same home where they'd publicly decided I wasn't worthy. For the first time, I didn't feel bitter. I just felt done. But revenge, as satisfying as it was, still wasn't complete. Because even though I now owned everything, the world still thought I was the thief. My parents' lies had lived rent-free in people's minds for months. And I wasn't about to let that stand. So I called a journalist. Not one of the gossip chasers who'd published the smear. No, this was an investigative reporter I'd worked with before on charity projects. I told him I had documents, real ones, and that I was finally ready to share my side. He hesitated at first, worried about the family angle. But once I sent him the proof, legal filings, signed acknowledgments, digital audit trails, his tone changed. "This isn't a rebuttal," he said. "This is a dismantling." The article dropped a week later. Son accused of stealing family business provides evidence of decade-long mismanagement and forged records. It went viral in hours, not because of my name, but because it was such a complete reversal of the story everyone thought they knew. Screenshots of my parents' contradictions spread everywhere. One post they'd made claimed they never gave permission. Another admitted, "We trusted him to manage things." Commenters pieced together their inconsistencies like detectives. Within a day, sympathy turned to shock. Within two, it turned to ridicule. The same people who once called me a heartless son were now commenting things like, "So they lied about everything, and imagine raising a kid who saves your finances and then framing him for it." Even Adam's fans on his podcast page turned on him, flooding his posts with clown emojis and calling him out for enabling the smear. I didn't post a single word. I didn't need to. The truth did all the talking for me. A week later, I got one final call from Grandma. "I saw the article," she said, voice soft but steady. "You did what you had to do." "I didn't want to hurt them," I admitted. "I just wanted them to stop hurting me." "They'll never understand," she said. "But now the world does. And maybe that's enough." She paused. "Ryan, promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't let this make you bitter. Some people stay blind their whole lives. You just finally stopped living in the dark with them." Her words stayed with me. Because even though I'd won, legally, financially, publicly, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. And in that quiet, steady moment, I realized revenge isn't about destruction. It's about liberation. Still, there was one last thing left to do. Something that would finally put everything to rest, and maybe, just maybe, make them see exactly what they'd lost. Fallout came slower than I expected. Not the explosive kind that tears through everything at once, but the quieter, more humiliating kind that drags people down day by day, until they have nothing left but the echo of their own choices. After the article went viral, my parents disappeared from social media entirely. The Facebook posts were deleted, the videos vanished, and the family friends who used to comment, "So proud of you too," stopped calling altogether. Their silence wasn't loyalty, it was self-preservation. Nobody wanted to be associated with a scandal that had flipped so publicly. Adam tried to hold out longer. He posted a half-hearted video on his podcast page titled "The Truth About My Brother." He talked about misunderstandings, about family disagreements blown out of proportion. He didn't mention the forged transfers, or the lies, or the fact that he'd been part of the smear campaign. But the damage was already done. The comments were merciless. "So, no apology? Didn't you help your parents post the fake story? Bro, the receipts are out there. Just stop." Within a week, he took the video down. The next time I checked, his channel was gone entirely. I didn't celebrate. I just watched. Watched how the people who'd laughed at me across that dinner table now lived under the shadow of their own humiliation. Watched the way karma moved. Not in anger, but in quiet precision. The house I'd repossessed was still technically mine, though I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Part of me wanted to sell it, just to close the chapter. Another part wanted to let it sit empty, a hollow monument to everything that went wrong. But fate had a different idea. One afternoon, I got a call from the property manager. "Hey, Mr. Brooks," he said cautiously, "you should probably come down here." When I arrived, a small moving truck was parked out front. Mom and Dad stood by the curb, arguing in low, frantic tones. Adam was there too, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. They looked smaller somehow, like the years of control and confidence had melted off them. The manager pulled me aside. "They're trying to move back in," he whispered. "Said you gave them permission." I looked over at them. My mother noticed me first. Her face softened, the way it always did when she was about to manipulate. "Ryan," she called, walking toward me. "Thank God you're here. We've had nowhere to go. The rental's lease ended, and the landlord, well, you know how people are once they read things online." Dad stood behind her, eyes full of restrained anger. "You've made your point," he said flatly. "Now be a man and give this family back their home." I took a slow breath. "This isn't your home anymore." Mom blinked. "Don't say that." "You said it first," I replied. "That night at the restaurant, remember? You told everyone I wasn't part of the family. You laughed while they clapped." Her lips trembled. That was a mistake. No, I interrupted. It was the most honest thing you've ever said. Dad took a step forward. Watch your tone. I met his glare evenly. Or what? You'll post another video? Call the police? Go ahead. I'll show them the paperwork. For once, he had no comeback. Adam finally chimed in. Come on, man. We're all tired. Can't we just move on? Move on. I repeated. You mean forget? Pretend none of it happened. He shrugged helplessly. What do you want, Ryan? For us to crawl? To beg? I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted exactly that. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be humiliated, betrayed, dismissed. But another part of me, the tired, quiet part, knew that no apology would ever feel enough. Some debts can't be paid back with words. I turned to the manager. Let them grab their things. But once they're done, I want the locks changed. Mom gasped softly. Ryan, please. I didn't look at her. You have 1 hour. When I walked away, she called after me, voice breaking. We're still your parents. I stopped but didn't turn around. You stopped being that the day you turned me into a headline. That was the last thing I ever said to them face to face. Over the following months, I heard bits and pieces through distant relatives. They'd moved into a small rental outside the city. Dad tried consulting again, but nobody wanted to hire him after the public fiasco. Mom picked up part-time work at a local boutique, pretending it was just for fun. Adam vanished into gig work, driving, freelancing, anything that paid the bills. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was consequence. And while they struggled to rebuild a fraction of the image they destroyed, I kept growing. My company expanded into new regions. Clients who had doubted me came back, impressed by how I'd handled the chaos with silence and professionalism. For every lie they told, I'd built something lasting. One evening, months later, I got another letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly, Mom's looping cursive. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Ryan, I don't expect forgiveness. Your father and I are ashamed of what we did. We let pride ruin everything. We see that now. We're sorry, not for losing what we had, but for losing you. If you ever find it in your heart to visit, the door will always be open. Love, Mom. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't reply either. Some things are better left in silence. Weeks passed. Life found rhythm again. I focused on work, spent weekends with people who actually cared about me, friends who never once questioned my worth. For the first time, I wasn't living to prove anything. I was just living. One Saturday morning, I drove out to see Grandma. Her health had declined a bit, but she still had that same spark in her eyes. She was sitting on the porch when I arrived, a blanket over her knees and tea steaming beside her. I heard about the letter, she said softly. Are you going to see them? I shook my head. No, I think we're done, Grandma. She nodded slowly. Sometimes letting go is the only revenge that lasts. We sat together in silence for a while, watching the sky turn gold. Then she looked at me and smiled faintly. You know, your father always thought power meant control, but you learned something he never did. What's that? I asked. That real power, she said, is being able to walk away and never look back. I smiled. Maybe that's the lesson I needed all along. She chuckled softly. You always were the strong one, Ryan. They just couldn't see it. That night, as I drove home, the city lights shimmered on the horizon, the same skyline I used to look at when I was broke and determined to make something of myself. Except this time, there was no hunger, no resentment, just peace. Before heading in, I took one last detour, down a familiar street lined with maple trees. My parents' old house still stood there, lights off, windows dark, for sale sign out front. The same home they'd lost trying to teach me a lesson about pride. I parked across the street, engine idling, and just watched. Memories flickered. The dinners, the arguments, that awful night they announced I wasn't family. Then I smiled, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Some victories don't need witnesses. I rolled down the window, let the cool night air in, and whispered quietly to myself. They finally made me proud. Then I drove away, leaving the house, and everything it stood for, behind me for good.